To House Resolution 597, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Langworthy, and a member opposed. Each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
In 2009, Colgan Air Flight 3407 crashed in Clarence, New York, a community in my district in western New York, killing 49 passengers and 1 person on the ground. As a congressional staffer at the time, I was there on the ground at the crash site. I saw firsthand the sights and the sounds and the grief of the victims' families as they grappled with the reality that their loved ones were gone and the crash was ruled a result of pilot error. A year later, those families successfully fought to implement a set of enhanced safety standards, including requiring pilots to obtain 1,500 hours of training. The results are indisputable. Since its enactment, domestic airline fatalities have dropped 99.8%. Simply put, they're working, and our skies are the safest they've ever been. My amendment protects the integrity of the 1,500-hour flight training requirement in the face of efforts to lower pilot training standards and jeopardize the safety of passengers, crew alike. As Captain Sully Sullenberger, the Miracle on Hudson pilot, has said, while simulators have their place for experienced pilots, they are not a replacement for in-the-sky training, and this requirement must be protected. Our job as elected leaders is to protect public safety and to help ensure that no other family suffers the heartbreak of losing a loved one to an avoidable air tragedy. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment here today to maintain high-quality training standards for our commercial pilots, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves.
Does any member seek time?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to Amendment Number 10, offered by Mr. Langworthy.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Chairman,
the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I don't even know where to, it's hard to even know where to begin. You know, the sad thing about it is, very few people have actually read the report on what happened to Flight 3407. And, you know, starting out, I have to say that I don't question anybody's motives on whether they oppose or support or whatever the case may be. The sad thing about it is the wrong questions are being asked. Now, what we are trying to do is not in any way change or weaken the 1,500-hour rule. What we're trying to say is that simulator time, which you can simulate anything, simulator time should be used in training pilots. So I'm an ATP, and I'll kind of explain how that process works. You get your private pilot certificate, then you move on to your commercial certificate. After an instrument rating, you get the single-engine commercial rating, you get the multi-engine commercial rating, then you move on to the ATP. It stands for Airline Transport Pilot, of which I have that rating. I have flown all of the profiles that anybody would have to go through to achieve an ATP. Now, what's interesting in this whole process is that if you take a look at the recommendations that came out of the investigation when it comes to Flight 3407, the Buffalo accident, you have to wonder, and again, this is where the wrong questions are being asked. The pilot had 3,379 total hours before the accident. This pilot failed 6 check rides, not just check rides that were recurrent. He failed his initial instrument check ride. He failed his commercial single-engine check ride. He failed his commercial multi-engine check ride. He failed at the Gulfstream Academy when he was checking out in Gulfstreams. He failed his check ride in the Gulfstream. He failed his ATP check ride and had to do remedial training. And then ultimately, when he was upgraded to the plane that ultimately in the accident, he failed his 6th check ride. So he didn't fail some of his check rides when he advanced from one rating to the next. He failed all of them and had to go to remedial training. Now, I ask, would you get on an airline or a flight or put your family on a flight if you knew that the captain had failed all 6 check rides as he advanced through his process? No, you wouldn't. Not in a minute. And would you if it was recommended that the pilot have remedial training? So here we are with a simulator. You can simulate anything. I remember one of my simulator profiles or one of my simulator flights. So we were coming in, I was doing an approach, lose my autopilot as a result, so I have to hand fly the approach. 0 visibility, 200-foot ceiling, which is at the minimum. As I'm on approach, I lose a sight of the runway because the ceiling comes down. I have to execute a go-around to reestablish my approach. This is all being done in the simulator. As I'm executing my go-around, I lose an engine. I have to execute a go-around with 1 engine to minimums, and I have to get it on the ground in 0 visibility. You can't simulate that in a real airplane. You can't simulate any of this, any emergency in a real airplane. First of all, in an airliner, that means the airplane's going to have to be taken down because it's going to have to be checked. If you do stalls in a full-blown airliner, then you're going to have to take that aircraft down to have the airframe inspected because of the stress that is put on it. Now, what I do want to point out is ALPA, the airline association that represented the pilots. I got on their website, and I find it fascinating that one of the things that they like to point out, and I'm glad they were part of the board, which was the ARC, that's the Aviation Rulemaking Committee, which is who we established to make recommendations on exactly how much simulator time we should add. They co-chaired the ARC when it came to investigating this accident. And you know what, one of the things that they tout, one of the things that they are very proud of on their website that they push, when it comes to one of the recommendations made by the NTSB, additional training on upset prevention and recovery, a new certification training program course requirement. These new simulator-based training requirements also include performing manual control maneuvers, procedures, slow flight, blah, 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 all these things. They actually endorsed more simulator training because you can simulate anything. Today's simulators, by the way, are far and above what they were just 10 years ago. I've also got the testimony that the NTSB gave in the Senate hearing. How much time do I have?
Gentleman's time has expired.
Well, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, Mr. Chairman, because the testimony in the Senate hearing, it says it all. And with that, I would urge my colleagues to not support this amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman yields. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Michigan and one of only 2 commercial airline pilots in Congress with more than 20,000 flight hours, Mr. Bergman.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a former commercial airline pilot, with more flight hours than pretty much almost anyone in Congress, so I've been told. I value safety first, safety second, and safety third. I am proud to stand with Rep. Langworthy in support of his amendment. The substitution of simulator time, while you could argue that simulators are better today, yes they are, for a reduction in actual flight time, provides no substantive benefit to a prospective pilot. While some may say that pilots only build hours by spinning around in circles in the sky, I say that is patently false and portrays a pilot workforce that Congress relies on each and every day of the week in a very negative way. Pilots have a variety of options when it comes to building hours, and we should not assume every pilot will always do the bare minimum. In fact, I've seen pilots always do the extra just to make sure they got it right. Congress should not be reducing safety and statutory flight hour requirements under the assumption that somehow this will make pilots gravitate towards regional airlines for employment. It won't. I thank the gentleman, and I offer great support for his amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to my friend and colleague from Buffalo, New York, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Congressman Langworthy. As the Congressman has said, that prior to the crash in February of 2009, we were of the belief that if the plane said Continental, that it was operated by the national carrier. It wasn't true. It was operated by a regional carrier. And the level of safety, there were two levels of safety. One, the larger carriers, 1,500 hours for pilots, and the regional carriers, in the case of this flight, 750 hours. The National Transportation Safety Board did a thorough investigation of the crash site and the circumstances surrounding it, and made an unequivocal conclusion that it was pilot errors. The plane went into an aerodynamic stall. The pilot did exactly the opposite of what they should have done. The plane pitched, it descended. As Mr. Langworthy has said, 49 people died, including one individual on the ground. Since that change was made, commercial aviation fatalities decreased by nearly 100%. We ask that the 1,500-hour pilot training rule be sustained in the FAA reauthorization bill. And I yield back to Mr. Langworthy.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Tenney.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Americans do not take their life into their own hands when they board a regional flight. They expect to be safe no matter where they travel in the air. Since the 1,500-hour flight requirement was passed in response to the tragic 2009 Colgan Air Flight 3407 crash in Clarence, New York, the success of the policy speaks for itself. American airspace is among the safest in the world, with a 99.8% reduction in passenger airline accident fatalities since 2010. This is why most pilot groups oppose any dilution of the flight hour requirement. It is vital that our pilots have full competence in the high-stakes environment of a cockpit in flight. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the Langworthy Amendment number 5 and stand with the flying public and the Colgan Air families. I yield back.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
We put our lives in the hands of airline pilots, and we should apply the same standard of safety and training that Americans have come to trust and to expect. I strongly urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Requested a recorded vote on the amendment.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 8, further proceedings on the amendment offered by